Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi Series 4. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
It's 2021. We've stepped out of our time machine for the last time to find that real life is still pretty awful. So James and I are casting reality aside and uploading our podcast consciousness to the digital grid. Series 4 is all about virtual reality.
Yes, we're taking a break from the drab reality outside and we're going into the virtual world this series. So we've got a lot of fun films to look at, as always. We're going to be delving into the history of science fiction cinema and how it's changed over the years and how VR has been used in many of these films we're going to be looking at throughout the series.
The fact of the matter is, in virtual reality, there is no limit to what we can do. We can be anywhere, anytime, any place, and that's the issue. It's total escapism.
We are now reaching the point where the simulations are so realistic that the line between playing a game or simulation and actually blowing people up is becoming blurred.
But as computers grow more powerful, the graphics more detailed, and the sensations more human, virtual reality will force us to ask, what is real?
So there was an explosion of VR in the 80s and 90s in cinema, and a lot of the films we're looking at are going to be coming from that period. But we're also branching out and looking at ways that technology is used in cinema to augment or change the reality that the characters face. So we'll go a little bit beyond the standard headset transporting you into a video world and looking at other ways that false realities are created through technology.
Yeah, and I think our time travel series has given us a lot of the sort of skills to look at these films now, because in our time travel series we looked at different sort of like alternate realities and changing times and things like that. So I think it's going to be interesting to sort of use those kind of things we learned in the time travel series and see how they apply to these VR films.
Yeah, and of course there's links back to our first series as well on AI. We looked at TRON and The Matrix in that series, which are two big VR movies, and we're going to be going back to those film universes to have a look at them from a virtual reality perspective as well.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting revisiting those films and sort of like seeing what other stuff we can sort of like uncover when we delve into those and do sort of like proper deep dives on those films. So first thing I'd like to know then, Matt, is what do you reckon your first experience of like virtual reality, what sort of thing, like when you were a kid, you found out about and you were like, oh, so this is what VR is. What were your like early understandings of that as an idea, as a concept?
So I think it's like somewhere halfway between watching TRON when I was really, really young and getting the idea of being digitized and sent into a computer world. And then I feel like VR headsets being like advertised in comic books was a thing when I was young. But I can't imagine what they would have been like because we're only just up to like workable VR headsets now. So I don't know what's in my memory if that was just like a marketing tool for something else entirely. But the concept of putting on a headset and then going into like a digital world was a big thing in the 90s when I was young. What about you? What do you remember?
Yeah, I think it's all that sort of same thing, isn't it? And talking about like early headset ideas and things like that, when I was a kid, we had this thing called a Viewmaster. So it was like a little red thing you put up to your eyes and you could flick through slides. And I would say that's sort of like the first kind of virtual reality. It's not virtual reality in the way you'd talk about it now in terms of like computer generated realities and things like that, but something as simple as that, as having like something which changes what you're looking at and sort of flicking through those as a kid. And we had like there were loads of 3D Disney images on the slides. So you'd like switch around and you see that and it was in 3D and it was really cool because you could look around and it sort of changed perspectives. All that kind of stuff was like my early understanding of sort of like what has now come to be VR. So I think that was one thing which I noticed as a kid.
Yeah, I think that is a type of VR, isn't it? And that's been around for like a good 100 years, I would say. That's like an early 1900s toy, isn't it? That's had a lot of it's hung around for a long time. And it's had a lot of enduring popularity with kids. Yeah, those things are really cool. They always seemed really like futuristic when I was young, and I like looked into one of them.
Yeah, I always used to want to play with it because like I think it was my mum's the Viewmaster. So it's like I had to ask her if I wanted to use it. And then I think we got some like Disney slides and stuff, so I was able to use one. I think I got my own version. But I mean, that's beside the point. But there's lots of like other VR stuff I remember as a kid, like programs like VR Troopers was a big one for me because it came off the back of like Power Rangers and all that kind of stuff. And I don't remember too much about it, but I know they sort of like would go into this computer to fight like evil virus monsters and stuff like that. I think that was the main sort of premise of the program.
Yeah, and I know we were texting, you and I and Mike from the Evolution of Horror podcast, we were talking about the series we were going to do, and you two were really talking about Reboot a lot, which that kind of passed me by when I was a kid. What are your memories of Reboot? It looked cool when we were young.
Yeah, because that was like a fully CGI kids show, wasn't it? So it was all done in the kind of like the manner which you see like things like Toy Story and Pixar have really picked up on, but it was like early basic CGI. And the main premise for that is it's this computer world and kind of like Tron. So all the computer programs are like characters and they live in their own little world and they fight this evil villain called Megabyte, I think his name was. And it's like computer viruses and it's like visualizing the world of the computer and that's sort of like that idea, that cyberspace.
I think it's that development of computer technology in the 80s and 90s is what caused that explosion of VR cinema, wasn't it? So computer-generated imagery, the development of that, the advancements that were made at Disney when they were making Tron, and then at Pixar, like you said, very similar to what was going on Reboot. I think the development of that technology enabling filmmakers to create these complex digital virtual worlds, I think there was just something in that mindset of those creators that the ability to create those worlds, it was a natural evolution that virtual reality would be an interesting thing to tell stories with when you're creating that technology. Yeah,
and it's got so many sort of like escapist aspects to it and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's like it was prime for cinema, which is an escapist art form in itself. You watch a film to try and like delve into a different world. So the idea of VR kind of like feeds into all those kind of things as well. So when we talk about virtual reality and reality, this was an interesting thing that I found sort of like when I was looking at sort of did a bit of reading before this episode. So apparently there's kind of like, when you think about reality, there's 3 different categories that you'd kind of put it into. So there's real constructs, virtual constructs, and possible constructs. Now I found this quite interesting because so a real construct would be something tangible like a book or a pencil or a person or something like that. That's like a real thing in the real world. That's how we define that kind of reality, something physical. And then you've got virtual constructs, which are sort of like exist in the digital world. So like a computer program, if you're on your phone and you're using some sort of app, all of this is sort of like a virtual idea. Like even how banking works nowadays. So all of your money, you don't have physical money, it's in an account. So that's a virtual construct. So there's ideas like that. And then there's possible constructs, which are the actual ideas about things. So like philosophy, any sort of metaphysics, all of that kind of stuff where you're having an idea and it's in your head and that's like another kind of like reality in itself. So what do you think about sort of like that idea and how you split those off?
So where does virtual reality sit in those concepts of what's real or types of real things?
Well, in most of the virtual reality we look at, it's like it is a virtual construct. It's like a computerized version of something. But when does that become, like in some of these films, the virtual realities they create are indistinguishable from sort of like reality. So it's kind of like how those two worlds are merging and how they all start from like an idea. it's a pretty heady concept already. Like just going into all of that kind of like, what is the whole idea, like, are we living in a simulation? That's like one of the main things that virtual reality films in particular and in fiction, those are the kind of like concepts they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think we touched on the simulation hypothesis in series 1 when we were talking about AI, or maybe when we talked about devs a bit later on, I can't remember. But that's a terrifying prospect that we might get into in some of these films that we're going to be looking at this series. Those different layers of what is real and questioning your own reality as well, all folds into that same kind of idea. And I think we're going to be seeing quite a lot of that. And again, I guess it's the development of the technology again, isn't it? Like you might make a film like TRON in the 1980s because it's you might think that it's possible that you could one day create a perfect digital recreation of the world that's indistinguishable from reality, but it's not as readily accessible to audiences. So your digital reality looks bright neon and very slightly cartoony mixed with reality in Tron. But then 10, 15 years later, films like The Matrix are coming out where it's much easier for audiences to conceive of like a virtual reality that is indistinguishable from real life and it just looks like a real world.
And those were sort of like the early ideas and concepts around virtual reality. But like now if you look at something like augmented reality and even things as sort of like as simple as something like Pokemon Go, for instance, like that's an augmented reality. That's like you're seeing the real world, but there's something extra on top of it that you're interacting with. So I think there's going to be films that we're going to look at which will have that kind of stuff in there as well.
Yeah, Pokemon Go came out like 2015, 2016-ish, around then, wasn't it? And I feel like that was a time when augmented reality was really becoming a huge thing, the sort of early to mid 2010s, when basically phone cameras were good enough that, they could record in real time, but there was also software that would interpret that recording and add animation to it or add other stuff to it that would allow you to create a game like Pokemon Go. And now we have like, Snapchat filters and everything like that. That's a form of augmented reality that is... I guess just second nature to people who are, using that kind of social media a lot.
Yeah, and it's so weird because like even something as simple as like you said, like an Instagram filter, that is augmenting your reality, and that sort of like has some sort of roots in this idea of VR, doesn't it? Which I think it's not something you usually think about, but it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of applies to some of these films and also where it's going to sort of like progress in the way things are sort of like dealt with in cinema in the future.
Yeah, I do think the most recent trend in cinema, years and years, that BBC TV show, Black Mirror's done it. Augmented reality is becoming a more popular sci-fi trope than what we might associate with virtual reality in films of the 80s and 90s. Because it is becoming so common in our day-to-day life. There's room in augmented reality to fit into the cyberpunk genre quite a lot, because when you get into those augmentations on reality, there's also a lot of scope for like implants and changes to your body to make you half cyborg type creature with all these digital implants that allow you to see reality in a different way. So there's a lot of crossover with that genre as well in the VR films, and I expect we'll be looking at some of them later.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely have to talk about some of the cyberpunk films sort of like that mix into this subgenre, because like the whole idea of like jacking into a different reality and then plugging something into your brain and all of that kind of stuff, it's so fundamental as a trope and as a part of these films which we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, so I've been talking about like the 80s and the 90s for cinema, but you mentioned the Viewmaster. That's really old. That's like 100 years old or more even. The ideas behind VR, they go back a lot further than when cinema was picking it up, don't they?
Yeah, because even when we talked about sort of like Méliès and all that kind of stuff and how early cinema started and all of these kind of ideas about adding extra sensory experiences to watching a film, I think have been around for a long time. But in terms of fiction, it's also been sort of like a thing which has developed in fiction like over the years. Like there's a book or a series of short stories rather by Lawrence Manning, and in the series of short stories, I think it's called The Man Who Awoke. And it describes a time when people are sort of like being connected to machines, and those machines replace their sort of like their senses, and they put them in this sort of like virtual life, and they get to choose what that virtual life is like. So that's like, if you're thinking that they're having those kind of like ideas in 1933, those are the early points of things like The Matrix and all of that kind of stuff. So to think that that's kind of where it started, this idea in a science fiction story, and then it's progressed from there is crazy to think about.
Yeah, and you've got stories like Stanley G. Weinbaum's Pygmalion's Spectacles, which is about a set of VR goggles. That's from 1935. I'm guessing he took some inspiration there from the Viewmaster and stuff like that, and zoetropes and devices like that. It's got a lovely bit of opening dialogue. These two people at a party, and it's this like gnome, described as gnome-like old man, and he says, "But what is reality? All is dream, all is illusion. I am your vision as you are mine," which is a lovely bit of poetic language, questioning the nature of reality and illusion. And I wonder if we're going to see filmmakers playing with this idea of reality and the nature of fiction, particularly film and cinema, because cinema is a type of virtual reality or augmented reality, isn't it? You sit in a dark, empty, hopefully empty, projecting my own wishes onto a cinema there, but you sit in a big dark room with a big screen and you're watching this recreated version of reality play out on screen. You're entering a virtual world a lot of the time when you watch a film, and the idea of suspension of disbelief is vital to fiction, and in a lot of VR it's going to be important in terms of how much characters believe they are in a simulation or believe they're in reality. Yeah,
it's interesting that line sort of mentions dreams as well, because I think the idea of dreams, which would be like a possible construct, wouldn't it, in this case, that is going to feed into our sort of viewing of virtual reality, and sort of like things like Inception and Paprika. Those are films which sort of like use that kind of like dream logic in their sort of in the way that they're showing their virtual realities.
Yeah, Inception's going to be an interesting one because, yeah, like you said, it's dreams, but we get there through technology. I can't remember Paprika. I'm looking forward to seeing that again. It was a very good film, but I can't remember anything about it. But there's similar concepts there.
That's why we do the podcast, Matt, to revisit these films.
Yeah. It's a similar concept to Inception, isn't it? Using a device to like enter people's minds or dreams or something like that.
And I think if we're talking about sort of like early VR fiction, you have to sort of name check Neuromancer as well, because that was like the big one in 1984 that like fully had this idea of cyberspace and sort of like was the daddy to this idea of cyberpunk. So yeah. I think that's a very important one to consider when we're looking at that.
And a big influence on The Matrix, I think, as well.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. So what about sort of like early VR devices then? So we have talked about like the Viewmaster and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I came across was the Sensorama. Now, have you ever heard of this?
No.
So it was made in 1957, and it's kind of like the first 4D cinema experience almost. So this was like a little booth that you would go into to watch these little films, and whilst you're watching them, you'd get sort of like blasts of air to sort of simulate wind, and aromas would come at you and all this kind of stuff. And that made me think about sort of things like as simple as smell-o-vision. Like, do you remember, so the BBC did an episode of Noel's House Party back in the day.
Yeah.
And you had this like little scratch card, and you could scratch it and you had to sniff it at certain moments in the program. And then that got me thinking about all the ways that you are supposed to experience film and how like your reality is made through all these senses. So like sight, smell, touch, all of this is how you like experience your reality. So recreating these can be as simple as recreating a smell at the time you see something. So like, what do you think about that, like as an idea in itself?
Well, it's going to be relevant, I think, to what we're going to be seeing in the films that we look at, because what it calls attention to is that I think most of the virtual reality that we're going to be looking at is not covering 3 of the 5 senses. So virtual reality, you can see it and you can hear it. You can't taste, touch, or smell it, unless it's smell-o-vision. So that is an important thing to, that's 60% of your perception of reality that is not included in virtual reality a lot of the time. So films like The Matrix get into that in the sense that it's not a headset, it's not a visual auditory experience, it's plugged into their nervous system, it's completely filling their reality with information. So you can smell and taste things in The Matrix. The steak that Cypher eats is like a really important moment in the film for how he's not just understanding but enjoying reality, the taste of something. So it's completely consuming the senses in The Matrix, but that won't always be the case in all of these films. And it'll be interesting to see if that's even addressed and dealt with in some of the films.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
So now seems like a good time to take a little bit of a break from today's episode and talk to you a little bit about our Patreon. So we've recently launched the Patreon service. We're putting out bonus episodes and bonus content throughout the months. So if you want to support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi and you can get hold of that exclusive content we've got going on there.
And if you hop on over to our Patreon right now, you can check out our episode on Possessor, the new Brandon Cronenberg film, which is a dark sci-fi horror thriller that crosses over into the stuff we're talking about this series about virtual reality.
And here's a little snippet of that episode now to give you a little taster.
The basic premise is very, very sci-fi. It's an assassination organization who uses hijacking of people's brains to perform their assassinations, and then things go wrong in the movie. That's a very sci-fi concept, but then it plays out as this crazy psychological horror film. So it's a lovely, lovely blending of them. I thought it was a very Christopher Nolan premise.
Oh no. We know how much you love Christopher Nolan, Matt.
Well, I mean, this is the best Christopher Nolan movie of all time, in that case. I think it's an excellent movie. But that central premise of using this futuristic technology to do, present day crimes, I found that to be a bit like something Nolan would do. It's similar to Inception, for example.
Yeah, it's got those kind of vibes to it, doesn't it? Because in Inception, it's about sort of like the different layers of reality.
The sensor armor thing that you mentioned is really interesting because I've never seen a film in 4DX, but you said that was like from the 1950s. 4DX is basically still doing the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever seen a film in 4DX?
I think I've seen like it was at an arcade or something like that. You know how they have those little booths in places, and it was
right.
So it was like that, and sort of the chairs rumbled at certain points, and there was one bit where it kind of like jabbed you in the back when something was happening,
great.
which just hurt. It was like, I don't need this when I'm watching a film. So maybe virtual reality isn't for me. But
it doesn't sound good, 4DX. I mean, it just sounds crap.
And like getting sprayed in the face by stuff and things like that.
Yeah, it's not really what I love about cinema. But what's interesting about that, like that being jabbed in the back, was the thing that you were watching in the first person? Was it a point of view thing?
I think, yeah, there must have been a few moments when it was, because it's more like a theme park attraction, like early cinema devices were. So right. That's what it felt like when you're watching, because it's only like a short little film. So they try and do all the tricks they can as quickly as possible. Like the rides at Disney, where they do a sort of like a similar thing, where they put you in that world and you're trying to, because there's like a Terminator ride where they do like a similar kind of experience.
There was the Terminator short film. I didn't know that was like a 4DX thing, roller coaster type thing. Do you mean the one that James Cameron made and he brought Edward Furlong back? Yeah, I'm not sure. I actually don't know if that was 4DX style. But it's just interesting in terms of how that technology is being used to align the audience's point of view to the characters in a very physical, haptic way, and why they do that. And I think that, with stuff like that, that's a theme park attraction, and I think a lot of 4DX films tend to be sort of blockbustery, and it's more about like dazzling your senses than doing anything complex and interesting with aligning your point of view to the characters. So, does the audience need to be blasted with air? Does the audience need to feel like they are in the moment where something explosive happens or there's a big splash of water? Does it improve your experience to physically feel what the characters you're seeing are feeling? Or is that just a gimmick, I guess, is what I'm saying?
Well, that's more sort of a thing that you would associate with computer games, isn't it? Because in those worlds, you want to take on the role of like the protagonist, and it's you, and it's all first person generally. So you want to be that character, and you want to be in those moments. Whereas a film, you're kind of like a voyeur, aren't you? You're watching it from the other side. So even though you are connected to the characters, you're not actually the character in that moment in time. And sort of like the idea that VR is connected to like computer games as well, I think is something we're definitely going to get into. Like again, one of the early devices that they had for like VR was a total flop, something called the Virtual Boy, which was like a tabletop headset and controller, and it was all in, I think it was red and blue, like the usual, like if you've got old school 3D glasses, you know all about this, where you'd watch a film and it would go sort of like red and blue or something like that, and green. So it would all be like RGB colors, and then it kind of like jumps out at you slightly from the screen. So it was like a whole mini console based around that, which just didn't work because you're looking at the same color palette, even though it's slightly more 3D, it still doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, but the gaming industry hasn't given up on that. I think the Virtual Boy was the thing that I would have been seeing in like comics and stuff advertised. That massive headset, wasn't it? But the gaming industry stayed on top of that over the years. The Oculus Rift is primarily for gaming, isn't it? I think. And that's not the only one of them now, but it was kind of the relaunch of VR a few years ago. I think nearly 10 years ago it came out. But there's other competitor headsets now, and it's becoming a big thing again. Have you ever used any of those headsets?
I haven't. I have, in fact. There's a pub in London called the Four Quarters, and there's like a VR experience you can do there. And I know there's lots of sort of like places like that where you get to put on one of these sort of like an Oculus Rift. I'm not sure if it is those. And you sort of like go around and you are in the game. And there was one I did at a Game of Thrones exhibit where you sort of like went up and you were on the Great Wall, and then you sort of looked out and there were loads of White Walkers and stuff. And it's really off-putting when you're sort of like in these, because you can't see anything but the screen. So you're sort of like forced into that reality. And then like, I know in these games you can interact with other stuff as well, which is like, so it's so surreal because you're not actually feeling them, but you feel like you should be able to. So again, it kind of puts your senses a bit off kilter. Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting problem, isn't it? Like I was saying, that there's only so much of your reality that can be convincingly transported into that, and your other senses are telling you otherwise. And not even just your senses, but the sort of internal mechanics of your body, like your ears telling you, giving you information about your balance that doesn't quite track up with what you're seeing on the screen in front of your face. And that's how some people get motion sickness from these things, don't they? So I don't know, but the technology is getting better all the time, I guess, is the point.
I mean, one example of that is I had a job interview at a place which dealt with their whole sort of like ethos is they're trying to create gig experiences. So like if you're going to a concert or something like that, but from your own home. So you can watch these videos of these performances and you can watch them from different perspectives, and you can go around sort of like on your phone and see different things. So it kind of it's trying to create that concert atmosphere without actually being there, which is like a hard thing to actually do. but it's such an interesting concept and idea that like in the future, when you're watching something on YouTube or something like that, you will get this sort of like 360 panorama view of things, and you can choose to be like backstage or something like that and watching it from there. But then if you're thinking about the practical elements of that, they must have cameras everywhere in these gigs in order to do this kind of like 3D landscaping.
Yeah, live music must be a really tricky one. I love live music. I love going to gigs, but I'm not a huge fan of recorded live music. Like I rarely listen to live albums by the artist that I love because I just don't think it captures what you're getting from a gig. So VR going into that space is really interesting. We saw that dealt with in film when we went to the Sci-Fi London Film Festival this year, didn't we? There was a movie called Live, a German film that was all about people who couldn't put on live gigs. It wasn't a pandemic, but it was similar to the pandemic, and you know there was restrictions on live concerts, and the audience were using like VR headsets, but also like a vest. And from what I remember, they kept it kind of vague exactly what the vest was doing to you, but it gave you the experience of live music somehow. I think it was quite vague. I remember liking the fact that it was kind of vague about exactly what the vest did.
Yeah, it did feel vague. I remember that. But yeah, again, it's interesting that these things are coming out in films. And like, as with any good science fiction, it could lead to those technologies later down the line, but it's kind of like, it's the precursor to some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's a bit of a golden goose that companies will always be chasing, because if you can recreate experiences and really perfect that virtual reality in a way that's, affordable, let's be honest, because the Oculus Rift was prohibitively expensive when it first came out. But making that something that you can just package and sell is kind of a lot of companies' dream, I guess. So you can just lie in your bed and then have whatever experience you want, go to a gig, go on holiday, whatever, with your headset on.
Well, I think the guy who created the Oculus Rift was doing it from his garage. So he started off just like using these cheap bits of equipment initially, and then obviously when phone screens got better and things like that started to develop, he was able to go to companies and be like, right, I can do this like in this cheaper way. And then suddenly it became like a marketable thing, because I think before then, like I watched a video, and the sort of like analogy they used was binoculars. So you know how when you buy a pair of binoculars, some of them are really, really expensive, but that's because of like the time it takes to make the glass exactly the way it is. But when it becomes more manageable and cheaper, like a phone screen, then you can sort of like, then you can bring the costs down, and then these sort of like VR inventions will become more sort of like part of the mainstream. Like all of the new consoles have some sort of like VR headset now, and I think over time they're going to get more and more popular.
Yes, I haven't really been interested in any of those in the last few years, but recently haven't Valve released their own proprietary headset for their new Half-Life game?
Have they?
I think they developed their own headset for it. And it looks amazing. I've seen some gameplay footage of it. You know, it's a Half-Life game. They make very, very good games. And yeah, I think they've like created their own headset to go along with it, and it's supposed to be like very, very good, better than most VR experiences. So that if I could afford that, that would be the one, I think, to get me into VR gaming.
Reality doesn't believe in the impossible. It doesn't believe in moving without limits or breaking the laws of physics. Reality will never let you stop time or wield a lightsaber. Reality gave you one body and only one world to explore. Reality is yours to defy.
Right, so with all of that in mind, with what's going on in the real world now and in the last few decades, what themes do you think we're going to be seeing in VR films, and what are they going to be focusing on?
Well, I think obviously one of the key themes with virtual reality is trying to escape your own reality. So kind of like an escapism. Like the main reason you go and watch a film is to try and like see someone else's life, be in someone else's shoes. So in these virtual reality films, I think we'll see a lot of that. I mean, that's kind of what I think of when I think of virtual reality films, is that kind of thing. But then you've got the flip side as well of being trapped in a virtual reality. So I think both of those things are going to come out. What about you?
Yeah, I like the imprisonment side of it a bit more. I think that's really interesting. I like the idea that escapism can turn into imprisonment in these virtual reality films. You want to go in and experience it and just switch off from the real world, but then you become trapped or obsessed or whatever, or forced into it by the machines in the Matrix, and then you have to live in it. Twisting it in that way, I think, is really interesting.
I think also the fact that human beings are creating these virtual realities, at least that's what it sort of like, it generally comes about in some shape or form. And the sort of like godlike aspects of that as well, I think will be interesting to look at, because some of these characters, they do become godlike, don't they? They have such a, like, they control the worlds they're in, so they can control their realities in weird and wonderful ways, which gives them these like superpowers.
Yeah, of course. And going back to TRON again, there was a religious element to that where the programs saw the users as basically their gods.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see sort of like who are the godlike creatures and who are the godlike powers in these films. Like, is it going to come down to money aspects, like big corporations, like in TRON? Are they going to be the antagonists? Sort of like, where are the lines going to be drawn in these films?
And how do you think we're going to see the kind of dialogue between the real and the virtual worlds happening in these films?
Well, I think part of the reason sort of like virtual reality is so interesting as an idea and as a concept is it's a side to our own reality. So it's not like, so in like a fantasy film, it's a completely different world, a completely different like reality, which is untouchable from our perspective. Whereas in virtual reality, you could have like a fantasy world, but it's created by us. So there's a way to sort of step in and outside of these worlds, and you can sort of like pass through them, go into different worlds. I know there's a lot of anime series and films which really deal with this sort of like world building concept and sort of like the weight that comes with it of creating these worlds and how that affects people in this reality, that reality. If you're creating like AI constructs, virtual constructs of people, do they have their own agency? It's all that kind of stuff, which kind of like is going to be, which is like so important about virtual reality, I think.
Yeah, and that's where it crosses over into our first series on AI. This idea that if the virtual reality world is consistent and exists even when there are no humans in it, then you get into these ideas about AI. You know, the programs that are in there are starting to be viewed as sentient things that have their own lives.
Yeah, and then it comes down to how do you perceive what is real and what isn't real when it comes to like stuff like that. When it's so inseparable from the real world, what's to say that's not a real world in its own sense?
Yeah, which brings us back to the idea of the simulation hypothesis, which says that I think the point of the simulation hypothesis is we could be living in a virtual reality and we just don't know it, but it raises the question of like, does it matter? You know, are we any less real for knowing that? You know, you and I know we are real, we feel real, I think therefore I am, all of that stuff. So does it matter if we are created by, you know, digitally? And the same thing applies to any digital creations that we create in a virtual reality world.
Yeah, and sort of like looking at there's like a inherent prejudice that people have against AI, which has been like perpetuated in all these films we looked at in our series on AI, and sort of like how that changes when we look at the idea that if this is a virtual reality, how are we going to look at our creators? It gets all sort of like crazy in terms of like philosophies and different kind of ways of looking at these things, but I'm really excited to sort of get into those sort of like meaty topics.
Yeah, and we're gonna hit on some of them in depth as we always do, we're going to be going through some various themes. We're going to be using some films, obviously, to do that. So what are some of the films that we're going to be looking at this series?
We've got a whole heap of films to look at this series. So we're going to start off looking at the 70s, and World on a Wire is our first stop on our journey through sci-fi this series. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at sort of like how VR was first shown in that early sort of like TV film, I think it was. But we'll get into that in our first episode. Then we're going to take a sort of like a trip into the 80s, look at films like Brainstorm and all that kind of stuff. And where are we going to go to after that, Matt?
Well, like I said at the top, we're going to be revisiting the world of The Matrix. So we've already covered The Matrix, the first film, but we'll be looking at the sequels there and looking more at the world of the Matrix itself. And we'll be revisiting TRON with TRON Legacy, which I absolutely love. And I think I talked quite a bit about when we first covered TRON. But we've got a lot of other films as well. What are some of the films that you're most excited about covering this series, James?
I think when we properly get into the 90s cyberpunk stuff, I think I'm really going to enjoy looking at all those films, because there was like such a big boom after The Matrix came out, and things like Existence and Dark City have some really interesting concepts about virtual realities in them. So I think those are going to be some high points for me this series.
Yeah, I'm excited about them. We're going to be covering Strange Days and Dark City this series, which I've never seen. And I know they're big sci-fi movies. They were in that list of 100 top sci-fi films that we tweeted the other week from Starburst magazine. And I've always felt bad that I've never seen them, because I know that they're big sci-fi films. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm really looking forward to revisiting stuff like Existence, which I've only seen once when I was a teenager, and it just blew me away. I absolutely loved it. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into that and really getting stuck into it.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to look at like modern day VR films as well, because obviously Ready Player One was such a big like book when it came out, and then Steven Spielberg took on the film. So it's going to be sort of like, I'm intrigued to find out how we're going to see the development of VR in films, and then where it's going to end up with films like Ready Player One.
Yeah, exactly. As always, we'll be going on that journey through sci-fi. We'll be looking at the changes and how the genre develops over time and exploring the different ways that it does that. So I'm really excited. It's going to be a great series, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. When we were going through the different subgenres we're planning to cover on the show, I wasn't sure where we were going to go with virtual reality, but we've got some exciting stuff in store, so it's going to be a good series.
Next time on the show, we're going to be kicking off properly. As James said, we're going to be looking at World on a Wire from 1973, directed by Rainier Werner Fassbinder. And then we're going to be also looking at The 13th Floor from 1999, kind of a low-key classic, I think, that one. They're both based on the same book, so they've got roughly the same plot, but they're going to be dealing with it in different ways. So that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how those two differ from each other, and also like looking at World on a Wire from 1973, just to see what people's ideas of virtual reality were at that sort of like time period. So I think that's going to be a really interesting chat next week. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all over social media. You can find us at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pod. So come along and chat to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and please leave us a review. Why don't you drop a review for us and let us know what films you're hoping we're going to be talking about this series.
Yes, please do. We look forward to hearing from you. So that's us done for today. We'll see you next time.